If you're wondering how to interact with RESTful services with Oracle Application Express, the next session is for you. Hisham has a cool demo, and he will explain RESTful services in the coming session.
Hi everyone in this session. Hi everyone in Africa. I hope you are doing great. It's an honor to be with you today. I'm Hisham Ghulanin. I am an application development team leader at Al Majd Network and an Oracle Apex developer at FAM Properties. I'm from Alexandria. It's here on the map. Alexandria is the third largest city in Egypt after Cairo and Giza, the seventh largest city in Africa, and a major economic center with a total population of 5 million. Alexandria is the largest city on the Mediterranean, also called Bride of the Mediterranean by locals, the fourth largest city in the Arab world, and the ninth largest urban area in Africa. Alexandria was founded in 331 before Christ by Alexander the Great, king of Macedon. Our session today is about using RESTful services with Oracle Apex. If we will talk about RESTful, we should know the granddaddy of web services interfaces, SOAP, SOAP, is referring to Simple Object Access Protocol. SOAP was originally created by Microsoft. This gives it the advantage of being an established legacy protocol. SOAP was the first widely used protocol for connecting web services in a service-oriented architecture, or SOA. SOAP is almost always confined to legacy applications and projects, and over time its use is declining. What about REST? REST architecture. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. REST is web standard-based architecture and uses HTTP protocol. It revolves around resource, where every component is a resource, and a resource is accessed by a common interface using HTTP standard methods. REST was first introduced by Roy Fielding in 2000. In REST architecture, a REST server simply provides access to resources, and REST client accesses and modifies the resources. Here, each resource is identified by URIs or global IDs. REST uses various presentation to represent a resource like text, JSON, and XML, but JSON is the most popular one. A web service is a collection of open protocols and standards used for exchange data between applications or systems. Software applications written in various programming languages and running on various platforms can use web services to exchange data over computer networks, like the internet, in a manner similar to inter-process communication on a single computer. This interoperability between Java and Python, or Windows and Linux applications, or between Oracle Apex and ASP.NET, or between Oracle Database or SQL Server, is due to the use of open standards. Web services based on REST architecture are known as RESTful web services. These web services uses HTTP methods to implement the concept of REST architecture. A RESTful web service usually defines a URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. A service provides resource representation such as JSON and set of HTTP methods. The following four HTTP methods are commonly used in REST-based architecture: get, post, delete, put. Get provides a read-only access to a resource. Post used to create a new resource. Delete used to remove a resource. Put used to update an existing resource or create a new resource. In addition to using HTTP for simplicity, REST offers a number of other benefits over SOAP. REST allows a greater variety of data formats, whereas SOAP only allows XML. Coupled with JSON, which typically works better with data and offers faster parsing, REST is generally considered easier to work with. Thanks to JSON, REST offers better support for browser clients. REST provides superior performance, particularly through caching for information that's not altered and not dynamic. It is the protocol used most often for major services such as Yahoo, eBay, Amazon, and even Google. REST is generally faster and uses less bandwidth. It's also easier to integrate with existing websites with no need to refactor site infrastructure. This enables developers to work faster rather than spend time rewriting a site from scratch. Instead, they can simply add additional functionality. Oracle Apex provides with a range of REST services. Oracle Apex can consume RESTful services through REST-enabled SQL or REST data sources, or can be itself as REST provider. As a resources server, one of these is RESTful Services. From SQL Workshop menu, you can find a section called RESTful Services. You can use resource modules, resource templates, and resource handlers to configure RESTful services as implemented by Oracle REST Data Services or ORDS. The RESTful Services module contains resource modules, resource templates, resource handlers. Resource modules is a container that groups a set of related RESTful services together. A resource template defines an individual service that can be called. Resource templates are contained in resource modules. Each resource handler implements one and only one HTTP operation. It is important to understand how resource handler implementations are mapped to traditional create, read, update, and delete CRUD operations. After you create your own handler, the ORDS handler definition should be like that. Copy the full URL and share it with the client that need to access your data. Share the method, the parameters, and the authorization details if found. When the client uses your URL, he will receive the output in JSON format like that. Another service Oracle Apex provides to us is REST-enabled SQL. Create a REST-enabled SQL service to execute SQL or BLSQL defined in Application Express component on a remote Oracle database. We have here some requirements. The remote database must include Oracle REST Data Services ORDS release 17.3 or later on the front end and have the REST-enabled SQL feature enabled. All SQL and BLSQL is sent to the ORDS instance which executes it on the remote database. REST-enabled SQL references are stored at the workspace level and therefore visible in all applications. When you export an application, used REST-enabled SQL references are added to the export file. If you export an application and import it into another workspace, Application Express checks whether the target workspace already contains REST-enabled SQL references with the same static ID. If a REST-enabled SQL reference already exists, the application uses the existing reference. If the reference doesn't exist, it is created in the target workspace. You can create a report on a remote database using a REST-enabled SQL. You can create a chart, you can create a calendar, and you can specify a REST-enabled SQL reference in an existing component. Not only that, before Oracle Apex 20.1 to deploy an application from one Apex instance to another, you must copy both the application definition and underlying database objects used by the application. In Apex, you can package the app definition along with the database objects, images, and seed data necessary for your application to run correctly using functionality in Apex called supporting objects. You can then export this app and deploy into your target Oracle Apex instance, which will both install the application definition and create the underlying database objects. But Oracle Apex 20.1 simplifies this process by introducing the one-click remote application deployment wizard. Using a simple wizard, you can now directly export and deploy your application along with the supporting objects into the target system. You no longer need to separately export the app and its objects from the source system into files and then import into the target system. With just one click, you can directly deploy your app definition along with the objects from the source system to the target system. For example, from within your development environment, you can deploy your app to the remote production environment. You don't need to directly access your production environment to import the app. This process is based on REST-enabled SQL. Another service Oracle Apex provides to us is REST data sources. REST data sources enable developers to access to representational state transfer REST services or generic JSON data fields in applications and use the data in Application Express components such as forms, classic reports, interactive grids, and maps region in 21.1. A REST data source can contain one or many operations which are the references to a concrete external web service. Configurations at the REST source level are shared across all contained operations. How REST data source differ from legacy web service reference. Unlike legacy web service references, a REST data source contains metadata about the web service which can be used by Application Express components or EL/SQL processes to invoke the service and to process the responses. REST data sources contains multiple operators that differ depending upon the web service target. For REST services, an operation is a specific service handler such as get, put, post, or delete. Developers assign operation a database action as fetch multiple rows, fetch single row, insert row, update row, and delete row. However, you can assign each database operation only once to a REST data source operation. After this brief about RESTful in Oracle Apex, I will demonstrate to you how we can use REST data sources in a normal way, and how we can create REST data sources based on plugin, how we can create a synchronization table to integrate with the REST data sources, and how we can use this REST data source in the Apex components. And let's go. First, I go to Oracle Cloud Free Tier, then insert your credentials. From navbar menu, click Oracle Databases, and from right side, click Apex Application Development. You can create a new Apex service, but I have already created one, so I will choose Apex Africa Service. Open Apex Development Tool by clicking Launch Apex. Insert your credentials to sign in your development environment. Go to Applications Builder section, create a new empty application. Now, let's start our demo with creating a REST data source in a simple way. From Share Components, under Data Sources section, click REST Data Source, click Create button. I will create a data source from scratch. I'm using the Earthquakes data source or API. The data source type is simple HTTP. Write your favorite name and drop the API URL into URL endpoint section. After that, click Next. This API doesn't need an authentication to return data, so click Discover to return the data source's metadata. Discovering process returned for me the data profile and some of the returned values. Now finish your work with clicking on Create REST Data Source. Your data source is created successfully. Click on your new REST data source and test it by clicking on the Test Operation button. Now let's start creating an Apex component based on this REST data source. Create a new page, name it as you like. You can link it to on a navigation menu. As you can see, I'm using the created REST data source, which is named Earthquakes, and we can choose from the metadata of the API what I need to display in the report. Now we have a report with earthquake data from the API. I will change the report to be interactive report and change row per page to display all returned rows. Now I want to check the time taken returning the data from the API by adding timing substitution in the report footer. We can see 242 rows returned in 0.3 seconds. How about making an addition that reduces this time? Go to the REST data source. From the right side, click on Manage Synchronization. I will add a new table naming it Earthquakes. And before finishing this creation, I want to modify the data profile by making the ID column as a primary key. If I check the SQL statement now, I will find the primary key constraint added to the create table statement. Click on create table button will create a new table in the database similar to the metadata in the API. The table Earthquake created, and you can view it in SQL Workshop. If I click on Save and Run button, a job will start to synchronize between the API and my table. Refresh the page and I can find the log row added to the log report. This log explains to me that the request returned 242 rows in just one request. To make sure of the success of the synchronization, go to the created table and check rows count, and you will see the same number of rows. Now let's view what the advantages that I will get from the previous synchronization. Create a new page with an interactive report based on our REST data source. I want you to notice that this new option appears: enable use synchronization table to retrieve the data from the created table, plus adding the timing substitution to be sure from the result. You can see now all rows returned in 0.14 seconds. In another way, you can say that the synchronization will return the data on the half time needed by the API. Currently, let's fly to the third section in the demo: create the REST data source based on a plugin. On Oracle Cloud, if you use the App Gallery section, you can't find the plugin link in it because the cloud is still on Apex 20.2. But if we go to the apex.oracle.com that use Apex 21.1 from Gallery, not App Gallery, you can find a link called the plugins. Here, I want to draw your attention that you should always be up to date with all new features in the new versions. Click on plugins link and you will find two links. One of them redirects you to apex.world plugins and another one to sample plugins on GitHub. Let's go to GitHub. There is only one sample for REST sources. Under it, we can find fixed page size plugin. Download the file called websource type fixed page size.sql. You can alter this file as you need before importing it. To complete our demo, I need to make a small change in the downloaded file. I will change the default value parameter to be HTTPS instead of HTTP. Save the file and let's import it. Go to our working app from shared components, choose plugin and click on import button. After finishing the import plugin process, go to REST data source to create another one. This one, its type will be a simple HTTP. I will use in it the movie DB, the movie database API, and I will add the movie database credentials. You can get your API key from the movie database website. After discovering the data source, I will create the REST data source. If I test the operation, I will find only 20 rows returned. I want to be sure from that the API returned the correct number of rows. So I will use Postman to see what count of rows will be returned. In Postman, I can find 199 rows returned, but we can notice that we have a metadata explaining to us the count of rows, the total pages, and the page number. In other terms, we can call that a pagination. So every time I want to change the returned result, I need to send a different page number. Let's test our REST data source by creating a new page with an interactive report based on our new REST data source. Our interactive report always returns just 20 rows. You will be surprised when you see the difference after using the plugin. So let's create a new data source. Choose our imported plugin as the type. The plugin will change the URL endpoint automatically as we change it in the plugin file. Add the authentication details and finish the data source creation. When I test the operation, it will not return any data because I didn't add any value to the query parameter. As the last API, I will add cartoon word as a value of the parameter. Let me now do a synchronization table and check the count and structure of the requests. As the previous REST data source, we need to change the data profile and make the ID column a primary key. After that, create the table and save your work and run the synchronization job. The surprise is here. Go to the log report to see that we have 199 rows returned in 10 requests. When I open the details, you can see this structure of requests is similar to that I use in the post main, but it happened here automatically by the code in the plugin. Count the rows in the table, you will find 199 rows. Create a new page with interactive report based on our new REST data source and run your new page. You will find 199 rows returned from the REST data source, not just 20 rows. Use synchronization option to enhance your report performance, and let's search about Harry Potter movies in the returned rows. I didn't find any data. Do you think I will change the parameter as the last time? No. Let's see how to add Harry Potter query with the cartoon query. Return to the REST data source, clear the value from the parameter, and let's go to manage synchronization section. And start in adding two steps, one for cartoon and another one for Harry Potter. Have a look on the log. You can see two new rows in the report, one of them for step ID Harry Potter and the other for cartoon. Harry Potter step returned 32 rows in 2 requests, and cartoon returned as usual 199 rows in 10 requests. Return to the report page, enable the synchronization option, and search about Harry Potter. You will get 32 rows. Even If I disable the synchronization option, the API will return these rows. At this point, my demo ends, but power of working with Apex and RESTful didn't end yet. Search on the web and you will find a lot of tips and tricks. I hope you enjoyed this session. You can contact me on these social media links. Thanks. See you soon in other sessions.
Thank you very much, Hicham. I loved actually the idea of how easy it is to integrate Apex with external sources. And it's not you are connecting to the data that's not available in Oracle database itself. You can actually connect to any REST endpoint, any web service available on the internet, as long as it is accessible from your Oracle Apex. Not only that, you can sync the data, bring it to Oracle database, do all the analytics you want, and utilize the features of the Oracle database. Thank you. That was an informative session about RESTful services and how to utilize them in Oracle Apex.